this sourdough bread recipe is slightly different to the one that we posted previously. The main differences are that we're going to be using more water, so it's going to be higher hydration, giving us those nice big holes and nice rise. We're going to be using no-knead technique, so no kneading whatsoever, just folding. And also we're going to be using a different method of storing and maintaining your starter. Given most shops are experiencing flour shortages, I wanted to give you a method of maintaining your starter which requires less flour. Because if you keep your starter out on the counter, you need to feed it every single day. If you feed it about a tablespoon each day, you will need to feed it about 7 kilos every year. So that's about 5 bags of these every single year, which is not sustainable. That's why I want to tell you about the fridge method. So this is great for if you're baking only once or twice a week. The idea is that you feed your starter and then you put it in the fridge, and then the day before you want to bake, you take it out, you feed it twice, once around 5 o'clock, then again around 10 o'clock at night, and then in the morning you can utilize your starter as I'll show you in this recipe. I've also been feeding my starter with different proportions than what I showed you before in our video on creating your own starter. So when creating your own starter, if you have 30 grams of starter, you feed it with 15 grams of water and 15 grams of flour, which is great. But when you're maintaining your starter and you want to wake it up from the fridge, what you want to do is give it more flour. So for example, if you have 30 grams of starter, you feed it with 30 grams of flour and 30 grams of water. That means that the starter remains more active for longer. Make sure your container is airtight. Put your starter at the back of your fridge and we'll take it out the day before we intend to bake. I've taken out the starter from the fridge. It's been there for a few days, so I'm going to reactivate it because I want to bake tomorrow. It's about 5 p.m. now, so I'm going to feed this now, and I'm going to feed this again without discarding anything around 10 p.m. The goal is to end up with 160 grams of active starter tomorrow. That means for the first feed we need to discard down to just 20 grams. I'll explain this later. So we're left with basically 1 tablespoon of starter, which we are now going to feed with 20 grams of flour and 20 grams of water. Cover it loosely and store it at a room temperature. We'll feed it again in about 4 to 5 hours. It's about 11 p.m. I can see that the starter is coming back to life. I'm going to feed this 60 grams of starter with 60 grams of flour and 60 grams of water. We're now going to leave this on the counter overnight. I'll put an elastic band around the level where it is now, so we should be able to see how much it has risen overnight. And we're going to make the dough tomorrow morning. It's 7 a.m. and as you can see the starter has more than doubled overnight. It's okay if yours hasn't risen this much, but as long as there are bubbles and it has risen at least a little bit, that's fine. The best way to check if your starter is ready is to do the float test. So I've got 350 grams of water here, and I'm just going to plop some of this starter on there. And as you can see, it's floating on there. That means it's nice and ready. I've taken out 160 grams of the starter, leaving me with about 20 grams in here, which now I'm going to feed with 20 grams of flour, 20 grams of water. I'm going to seal this with airtight lid, and I'm going to put this back in the fridge. Back to our dough, we're going to add 8 grams of salt and we're going to stir to combine. I'm going to add 500 grams of flour. This time I'll be using 500 grams of white strong flour, but I also like to use just plain flour, like 300 grams of plain flour mixed with 200 grams of either brown flour or wholemeal flour. This will give you extra flavor and also extra gluten for strength. Mix it in to make sure there's no dry flour left, and we're going to cover it with a cloth and let it rest for 10 minutes. Now, instead of kneading, we're just going to take the sides of the dough and fold it back in itself. Do this at least 10 times. So trying to really lift it up and fold it over itself. You can also do this by hand. Just grab the side, fold it over, grab the side, fold it over. It's messier, but it achieves the same result. Now we're just going to rest this for another 10 minutes. Again, going to keep folding it at least 10 times, and we're going to rest it for 10 minutes. Turn the dough onto the counter and then wash your bowl. Dry your bowl, put a little bit of oil in there and then spread it around. Fold the dough in itself into a rough ball and flip it round. Just to make this a bit manageable, you can sprinkle some flour and then make it into a bowl with your hands like that. Going forward, we want to avoid using much flour because it will make the bread quite gummy if you end up using much flour from this point onwards. Pick up your dough, put it in a bowl. Put a damp cloth over your bowl and then wrap it in a couple of towels. We're going to let it rise for 4 hours. As you can see, it has risen and pretty much doubled. So what we're going to do now is flip this onto your counter. Just going to dust this slightly, again you don't want to use a lot of flour. And then what we're going to do is flip it over. And as we flip it over, just fold it in itself, make it into a rough ball basically. And then you can flip it over again. You can add a bit of flour if you want, just to stop it from sticking. And then we're going to let it rest like this for 30 minutes. Dust the cloth in your small bowl or your bread basket. And now we're going to move on to shaping the dough. Okay, I'm going to use a scraper. So we're going to start making it into a ball. Depending on how sticky it is, we will use some flour just on the top. Okay, yeah, it's getting a bit sticky, so I'm just going to apply some flour on top and get in there with my hands as well. The idea is to keep shaping it until the skin is nice and tight and it can hold its own shape. Okay, you don't want to overdo it because you may rip the skin. I think this should be okay. So, more shapes, and then we're going to put it in the basket with the face down. Like that. Close up the seam. I didn't get to kind of tighten it as much as I wanted to, so I'm just basically sticking the sides together a little bit just so it holds its shape better as it rises. So something like this. Essentially just bringing it in from the sides and just getting it to stick to each other, something like that. Spread some oil on the cling film and then I'm going to cover the dough like this. Usually I'd recommend to prove it for like 4 hours, but because it's warm today and because the dough is being so active and bubbly, we may not need more than 2 or 3 hours. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover it for like 2 hours, check on it, and then go from there. I'm going to use these containers to make sure that the towel doesn't press down on the dough. So we're just going to leave it covered like this for 2 hours, and then we'll have a look at it and see what's going on. It's been 1 hour and 40 minutes, and as you can see, it has risen a lot. We don't want to overproof this, so I'm going to start preheating the cast iron pan for 20 minutes at 250 degrees. cast iron pan or a casserole pan is the best way to bake sourdough bread. It will give you the most amount of rise because inside a steamy atmosphere is created, giving you a nice rise and good texture. But if you haven't got this, it's not a problem. All you have to do is put the dough on a baking tray as normal, and then get another baking tray, put some boiling water on there, and put that underneath this at the same time. So that will create a nice steamy atmosphere inside the oven. And then you can take that watery tray out for the last 5 minutes to give the bread nice browning. Take out the cast iron pan and reduce the heat to 220. Spread some oil on the bottom half of the cast iron pan just to make sure the bread doesn't stick, but be careful because it's going to be really hot. I'm going to flip the dough into the cast iron pan. Just be careful because pan will be hot. Score the bread as you wish. I'm going to try a single angled slice today. If you can get someone to help, it'd be good if they can spray it in the top half of the pan. Spray more. Keep going to get the nice steam going there. And now I'm going to close it and I'll put it in the oven. It's been 40 minutes, so we're going to uncover it. Great. And now we're going to put it back in the oven for another 5 minutes to get that crispy crust. Leave it to cool down on a rack before cutting into it.